and welcome to this episode of Freya's Free Practice Fridays. We have had a new name submission submitted this week, which was Phlegm-Free Pharynx Fridays with Freya, but I can't call it that because my host this week is Thomas J. Camp. How are you going, mate?
I'm very well, Freya. How are you? It's what is it over there? Almost midnight, afternoon. It's bright and early on my time of the world.
This is, look, I'm going well, and it's very reasonable here. 5:20 p.m. I've got a beautiful sunset coming along behind me, so it's nice to be doing this at a reasonable hour, not at midnight.
Oh, excellent.
So very happy with that.
I'll definitely make up for that phlegm part in your in the title there, but we'll see how we go. We'll give it a good crack.
Yeah, sorry about that, LBS. So that won't take. And on that note, before we get into news of the week, I'm going to have to start with some penalties here. And for you, Campy, a back-of-the-grid penalty for threatening to assault one of our A, funniest, and B, nicest supporters, who I happen to have met as well. You know, like I left Canada with gifts, coffee, no less, which I sat and watched Formula One with.
Hey, I love LBS's contribution. It's amazing. But I'll tell you what, when you just cop it every single day from the same guy, every time I check Discord, there's a new comment. It's just, I just lashed out once and it's exactly what he wanted me to do, but he's a quality individual. So I'm sure we'll share a beer at some stage.
I can confirm that he's... Indeed. I can confirm that he's absolutely a quality individual in the flesh as well. So don't worry, LBS, we've got your back. Campy's not going to take any swings at you. But let's be clear, I'm pretty sure he would win. But anyway, let's get into some news of the week. And the big one this week, Campy, is that the 2023 calendar has been released.
Yeah.
I'm going to start off with, sorry about this, James, no, you don't like it, but what the fuck, 24 races. This is a new high or low, depending on how you look at it. But let's start with some positives. What do we like about the calendar? For me, I like the fact that we've got some actual races that are staying. So we've got Spa, Montreal, Monza, Silverstone. I love Mexico. So I'm really pleased to see that they're all still on there. Some of those we knew. Some of them are just good to be confirmed. What do you like about the calendar, Campy?
No French Grand Prix, no Paul Ricard, the most boring race. I'm surprised they made that decision. I really am. But no Paul Ricard. No Germany, which is a shame. I would have thought Hockenheim Ring would have come back, but Germany, why? How can you not have a Formula One race in Germany? I know we haven't had one for a few years, but I mean, we've got Seb as a driver, we've had the history of Schumacher, and we've got German manufacturers potentially coming in Porsche. I'll pronounce it properly from now on. But Mercedes. Why are we not having a German Grand Prix? So I'm shocked they couldn't fit that into one of the 24 races. But for me, it's just too many. F1 should be 15 or 16 really big events every year. But it just feels like it's going to take away from some of the spectacle of the sport if we've got one. It's literally once every 2 weeks if you had it over a whole year, and I just, we start in March, we're going to end in just late November. That's a big season for teams, and not just teams. I'm talking about engineers, pit crews, designers, drivers. I mean, not that I care about the drivers too much, but I mean, everyone's got families and traveling around the world. I can't imagine getting on a plane, 24 times a year to go to some foreign country that's going to be a minimum 10 hours from your house. Is going to be hard work, but it's the commercialisation of this sport, really, and that's the way we're headed, and there's not much we can do about it.
Well, no, and like you said, it's just too many. And let's get into the negatives then. We went there already, but it's it's just too many. It's so intense. Like we'll go straight from Baku to Miami. You have a weekend off, then straight into the triple header of Imola, Monaco, Barcelona. Then you take 1 week off, bloody hot-foot it over to Montreal. 1 week off to get back to Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, and then after summer break, you're going into Austin, Mexico, Brazil. You have 1 week, then Las Vegas, then straight to Yas Marina, it's just too much, I think. And like you said,
I thought we were going
it takes away from the importance of each one.
I thought we were going all green and like being carbon neutral. This is like doing the complete opposite, right? At least this year there's some form to the season. We've got like your Melbourne's and so we started off in the Middle East, then you go to Melbourne and then do a little bit of Southeast Asia and then went to Europe with Miami stuck in there as a thing. I just think we should just make them areas at one stage so it's a hell of a lot easier. Imagine the logistics of this. They'll figure it out because they'll make it work. But, geez, on a $150 million budget cap too with 24 races, you got to factor that in as well. They're already talking about 3 engines for next year. So what more do they want people to do?
Well, that's it. And you kind of go, like, as it stands at the moment, you go Australia and China and you go over to Baku. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you go to Japan while you're there?
Yep.
Like you said, kind of group it into those regions. Now, I understand that there's potentially the risk that, fans from different parts of the world may be disengaged while you're in those different regions and people won't have a race in their time zone for weeks on end. But welcome to being an Australian supporter, for one. And why aren't we opening it either? I don't understand why Australia is not opening it. But yeah, like you said, well, lucky they have DHL as their partners to try and sort out those logistics because it is going to be a nightmare. Yeah. And like you said, with the cost cap on top of that as well, it's not going to be, this is not going to be a glamorous experience for people who are working in these teams, in particular, your mechanics and everybody else. They're staying in kind of low budget hotels and traveling a lot, and it's not exactly. It's already like that. So that's just going to be more and more challenging. I wonder if it is going to affect how some teams organise themselves in terms of going, do we have more rotation, for example, when it comes to people who are attending tracks?
That was my next question. What are the there should be some plus sides to it where you can have a wider team that travels and you get to travel to 75% of the races. I'm not sure how that works from weekend to weekend because then you've got shifting sides. It's like you've got your A-team, your absolute A-team, but then potentially 25% of that A-team sitting out because of a rotational roster. But it does give opportunities to other people to come into the sport and get involved. And, we are heading down a diversity program where they want more women engineers coming in, which is a good thing. But it gives opportunity for that as well. So, I mean, there is some good things to look at too, but overall I would suggest it's probably a negative thing to have 24 races. I think, like you said,
I think it just takes away from the importance of each one. It makes each one kind of less kind of pivotal in the championship. And what I would hate is that because you've got bloody Las Vegas as the second last race, the penultimate race of the season, and I kind of go, what if it's all on, down to the wire, and then you've got a fake car park track like Vegas as your second last race of the season? I don't love how it's been laid out, but it is what it is, as you say. And I can't remember who it was saying they're kind of happy to see Imola go, which I completely agree with. I can never remember what happens there. But of course, Domenicali was born there, so it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
No, Imola is there. It's the Emilia Romagna. But just on the Vegas too, as soon as I saw the date for that, I jumped on to try and get some hotel reservations on the Strip. You can't get them. All sold out. The best you can get is one of those. Look, I've only been to Vegas once, so I'm not too great. The best you get's just off the Strip in one of those hotels, which is not doesn't have a casino attached to it. So that just tells me prices are going to be ridiculously high for, accommodation, travel to get there as well. They're going to be banking on that. It's a good event for Vegas, and that's what they do well, and they can handle the capacity and that influx of, millions of people for a big weekend. Frustrating for us, though, that you can't even access bloody hotels, and it's only been, up for literally 10 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, I think we talked about this on a few previous podcasts. So, look, I think at the end of the day, events like Las Vegas, like Miami, are not designed for the general audience spectators to be able to access. Like, that's not what they're there for. They're there to bring new money, glitz and glamour, the American market who love the kind of pseudo-celebrity appearances, and that's what it's there for. I think maybe we just have to accept that. I think it's just interesting though, because when you speak to people who are really passionate about this as a sport, they just see that as a bit of a disappointing addition to where it's going. But hey, that's motorsport,
it is,
as a wise man once said. Another kind of news of the week component, which kind of fits into this element of the calendar being released, is that Monaco has also been renewed until 2025. Now, I love Monaco. I think I love the fact that it's kind of dripping in that history and brings an old school glamour to Formula One, but I do think that it's a bit of a boring race, especially on race day. Obviously, qualifying is much more interesting. What do you think they can do to try and make it, not boring?
It's not boring. Well, you can't change the track. It's so historic, and there's no room in that city to do anything other than, race that track. I think if they want to make it work, they need to make the cars a hell of a lot smaller. They're just too big and too wide, and we're not going down that path. We're only getting bigger and bigger wheels, more downforce to get the speeds that we want. So we're not going. If we went back to smaller cars, you may or may not have some passing opportunities into some areas, but in reality, there's not much you can do. The thing that we love about Monaco is qualifying, though, right? Qualifying is, you hear what it's like when Danny Rick puts a lap together around there, particularly in 2016 and 2018 when he put it on pole both times. Look, the elation, and it was him knowing that he could not get any more out of that car. And I think it was 2018, both laps he did in Q3, he put it on pole. And, you see the smile, and they know they've earned their money that day because, each corner, we're not talking tenths, we're talking, fractions of tenths in every corner. And to extract the pace out of that car really shows what these drivers are made of at times. I was at Melbourne this year. I was just going into turn 3, and that's blind, from 320 kilometres an hour, braking at 60 metres, 70 metres into a blind corner is just astronomically. I can't even fathom what it would be like to be, driving in the seat of those cars lit around those sorts of speeds around Monaco. So I'm not sure they can make it any worse than what it is, but that's motorsport for
That's going to be the theme of this podcast. But no, and do you know what else is really interesting? And just in terms of adding to, I suppose, the difficulty of this track as well. And I think about it as I exit the little completely unnecessary tunnel that we have here in Cayman, is that light, for example, differentiation as they're coming out of the tunnel and things like that. And they talk about that in terms of going, all of a sudden you're just blinded as you're coming out, and just lots of little moments like that, which do make it exciting. And let's just hope that Ferrari go and do Ferrari things and keep it exciting for everybody else during the race as well. Let's chat about some driver activity during the week. There's been a bit of testing going on. Yeah. So as is usual, McLaren have just invited the world. I think they've invited about 3,000 people now to test their previous cars, their previous Formula One cars. This week we've got O'Ward, obviously, who has done a bit of testing for them before, and obviously over with their IndyCar team, but also Palou as well. So this is interesting, though, because he's been caught up in a contract dispute between McLaren's IndyCar team and Chip Ganassi. This time McLaren didn't win, though.
Well, I've got zero sympathy for McLaren at the moment, but how many promises has Zach Brown got out there for Americans to drive F1 cars? It's like, yeah. Look, Pato O'Ward's genuinely got a relationship there, and it's like when Danny Rick drove that NASCAR that what's his name owns at Coda last year. You just saw the face. The same sort of deal happened for O'Ward. So he's shown some genuine pace. Does he We don't really know if he's good enough for Formula One until he actually signs on the dotted line and he gets a drive. But the reality is, McLaren have Oscar Piastri and Lando next year, and Lando is probably a long-term solution for that team unless he gets the chance to move up the grid. But Piastri will be there for 2 or 3 years. So where does O'Ward sit? I'm not sure he gets the drive. And for me, there's 2 Australians and a New Zealander in IndyCar that are faster than him that probably deserve drives in F1 over O'Ward anyway. So there you go. That's my little gripe. That's my little side swipe at McLaren for the week.
There you go. Exactly. It's a weekly activity. You've got to fit one in somewhere. Happy to facilitate, quite honestly, at this point in time. And we can move on from that. Like, I don't think there's much else to say about them. Like you said, dishing it out like, I don't know, free coffees. Alpine, also a bunch of people testing there. Some surprising, some not so surprising. We've got De Vries, Giovinazzi and Doohan testing in private this week, it's been said. So interesting with these three. Obviously, it's an important part for Alpine when it comes to giving their academy drivers experiences in an F1 car, but it's also doubling now as an opportunity to run some of those additional drivers. So obviously we've got ex-Alfa Romeo driver in Giovinazzi. We've got Doohan, who's currently off in F2. And obviously, as we've all been reminded of, De Vries as well. Campy, if you were Alpine, who would you be putting in that second seat?
Danny Rick, all day. The fact that they haven't looked at him and signed him straight away is remarkable for me. Knowing he only drove that car 2 years ago. Well, not even 18 months ago, realistically, he was in that car. And they saw the year that he had, that second year, and the way that he drove against Esteban Ocon he made him look like a child. Like, the race pace was comparable to Max Verstappen and everybody else. So, but if they're not going to go that way, and I can understand why they wouldn't go that way, they might feel a bit burnt by DR and the way that it left. But from all reports, the key people that were around in that Cyril Abiteboul era have now gone, and there's new people in there like your Mars, and he's going the way he wants to. Christian Horner, I believe, came out and said they'd take DR if he was Alpine. So that's
I want to quote that. I want to quote that for a second. Yeah. And this is so Christian Horner on podcast recently, I think just released a couple of days ago, who said, if I were Alpine, I'd take Daniel Ricciardo. They know him from a few seasons ago, and he was very together when he was there, scoring podiums. And he's the type of guy that you can rebuild. For whatever reason, he's not had a great experience for whatever reason, but you've got to think back to the stunning overtakes that he's been capable of, and that's still in there. There is a very capable driver in there, and you just don't forget how to deliver. Confidence in this sport is critical. He doesn't have confidence in that car, which is affecting his own confidence. I hope he gets another chance, and I want to see him stay in the sport and on the grid next year. Between the endorsement from Lewis Hamilton a couple of weeks ago and some statements like that, it is pretty telling, right?
Well, he's got the respect of the whole grid. I don't think there's anyone on the grid that would say that he hasn't performed and hasn't been one of those top drivers over the last 7 or 8 years, particularly since he moved into that top team in 2014 or 2013 at Red Bull. He's proven track record, got the results. I'm looking at the guys that are trying to come in, and they're all unproven, they're all untested. They haven't set the light, they haven't set the world alight in their categories. I mean, we talk about De Vries. He's done well since he's left F2. He had a great debut in the Williams. I mean, Doohan, I'm an Aussie, I'm rooting for him, but he's not
too early to promote him.
He's not a part of this class that has come into F3 and F2 and dominated straight away. He had a great second year in F3 after a disastrous first year and got the drive in F2, but he's been too inconsistent, and he gets race wins when it's a reverse grid or he's qualified well, but in the other races he fails to make up those places. But they're not doing a Piastri or a Charles Leclerc or George Russell in these categories. They're not setting everyone's expectations from here, up to 10. So I'm looking at who you would choose. Danny Rick's the clear favourite because he's the best driver available. And if you're not going to take him and take a punt on somebody else, well, it just goes to say what Lewis said. And Lewis said basically that there's people on this grid that don't deserve to be here. Daniel Ricciardo is someone that should. So, And there is people, there are people on this grid at the moment that don't deserve to be in F1. I'm not saying they're not competent and they're not here, but they never did the stuff behind closed doors or in the in the categories moving up to the sport that deserve to be here. So it's motorsport, Freya, and money talks realistically.
I'm going to keep a tally. We're going to turn this. It's after 5. It's after 5 o'clock. Yeah, that's true. I did. It's after 5 o'clock here, so I might start doing shots every time we say that. But it's no, it's completely true. And we name those drivers. De people who were testing this week. De Vries, Giovinazzi, Doohan's 19, which just shows the obsession with youth currently in Formula One. And sure, Alpine want to continue to support his progress. So maybe he falls under the, young driver kind of support, fine. Giovinazzi, he's still backed by Ferrari. So if anything, you'd say that he's more likely to go to Haas for next year if they don't end up re-signing Schumacher. But like you said, you go, why would you not take the tried and tested available driver rather than take somebody who hasn't, proven their stripes yet, earned their stripes yet? Mixed metaphors for the win. And who's unproven in F1. So it's interesting because, we can sit here and speculate, but hey, that's motorsport. So there are another couple of things. It's true. There are another couple of interesting things in Horner's interview as well. I listened to a bit of that this afternoon. He was just kind of talking about how he feels like Red Bull are strong across all elements of the business, which is what is partially allowing them to get results, which is kind of what we've talked about a little bit, where you go, yeah, you've got a great driver, but you've also got great strategists, great business people, great mechanics. Everything is tying together. They don't really have any kind of chinks in their armour. But he made another interesting point, which was about the communications with race director. I know we've been talking a little bit about Massey recently, but he actually said after Silverstone last year, they should have said no more direct comms with the race director. But he said by that point, everyone was kind of, so it's ultra competitive and just entrenched in it, and just like a dog with a bone, wouldn't let go of that championship. But it was just interesting to kind of go, in hindsight, when I'm sitting here talking calmly to you, actually after Silverstone, we should have said no more, because that was already proving to be troublesome.
It's good self-awareness by Horner. But I guarantee if he had the choice behind closed doors to give up that bone or not, he wouldn't have done it last year, and either would have Toto. So, hindsight's a good thing. We've all got PhDs in it, but the reality is they did make that decision and he was part of that. So it's all good to sit there and feel good. But, and quickly, just on touching that, I haven't listened to that interview. It's on my list of things to do, but we had a chat on Monday about Mattia Binotto, and there's been a whole lot of news come out in Ferrari this week about reviews coming on. And my first thought is they don't need to do a review. If they really look at the situation, they're up against Adrian Newey, Christian Horner, a Red Bull team that is well funded, have the best motor and the best chassis and the best driver that we've probably seen for 25 years on the grid. And that's the reason there is massive points deficits in this championship. That's the reason they haven't won a race since, the third race of the year, when they'd won the first 2 out of the 3 and Leclerc had been getting poles. Yeah, they're quick around one lap, but it doesn't get the job on a Sunday. And that should be as simple as their review, in my opinion. Keep Binotto, keep the team you're in. Don't replace people. Don't come back and be Ferrari of history. Just continue on your path. Trust the process, because eventually you get it right. You may have to make some decisions in 4 or 5 years' time if nothing's changed, but I think if you look across the world, the best sporting organisations or the best businesses in the world, you trust the process that's in place and you adapt and change when you need to, but you're not making radical changes every 4 to 5 years to try and rebuild. And I think that's where Ferrari need to be. So as much as I despise or I laugh at Binotto's expense at times, I think he probably is the right man for the job, and they should just stick with it for another 2 or 3 years to see what he can actually do with them.
I would agree with you, and I think it's very easy to, under pressure moments like this, as a team, you can compare the same to organisations. We've seen it happen in other sports where they say, oh, yep, the coach is gone. You know, clearly you haven't delivered everything else. We're under so much pressure from whether it's media, sponsors, other partners, whatever it might be, to make it look like we've figured out who's to blame, so to speak, and they're gone, and you start afresh. It rarely works. And even when you get that new person coming in, it takes them a couple of years to get to know the team, get to know their processes, understand what's working, what doesn't need to be fixed. I think when it comes to Ferrari, it's like you said, they're up against the best of the best who seem to have figured it all out in a lot of ways. They still have their moments. We can't forget, Max's DNFs earlier in the year, and they had their own reliability issues.
Yep.
And they haven't always got their calls right either. But it's just that they get it right more often than Ferrari seem to. But the other thing is I kind of go, well, sure, go and do a review, but do a review of those processes. How are you setting up for a weekend? Because what happened, for example, with Carlos when that wheel wasn't there, is it Carlos?
Yeah.
Charles, I can't remember. No, it's Carlos. That wheel wasn't there. And when they talked about it afterwards, they're like, the pit lane is so small and the garage is so small there that we need to, go further around the car. And you kind of go like, that can't be the reason that you lose a race or a position or a podium or points, because you hadn't thought about which way around the car you're going to go when you go to when you get to the pit lane. And sure, they'd said it was a very late call, but those are the types of things you go, get those things right. Your processes, your systems, your decision-making strategies, go and review those, because that's where I would say there probably is improvement to be made. And we're just not seeing those kind of errors being made in other teams. But like you said, I think drastic action would be a mistake, and just throw more change and uncertainty into what is already a difficult situation.
And yes, I'll take the blame for this, but we as a podcast take the piss out of Ferrari for it too, because it's standard Ferrari stuff, right? But at the end of the day,
exactly,
failure is what makes you succeed. And if you do not fail, imagine that team in 2 or 3 years' time when they've made absolutely every mistake that they can possibly make, and they continue to do so, and they're the bane of everyone's existence, and Italy's trying to war against the whole F1 world because Ferrari aren't getting it right. There's going to be a point in time when they have the confidence and the calmness to sit in that position and go, all right, we know what we need to do here. Let's just cool our heads and let's get this right. And eventually they're going to get it right if they choose to learn from these mistakes. And I think they will, because that's human nature. It's what we do. You learn from your mistakes. And it's not easy to watch. It's funny to watch at times, but it's, we can't be too hard on them, because they could be an organisation that turns it around in 2026 and has the best car, the best chassis, best driver, and goes and does what Mercedes or Red Bull's done for the last, 16 years or whatever it's been. So kudos to them. They'll be right.
And I hope they do, because I hope they do, because like you said, it can be funny, but it's not fun at the same time. All right, let's move on. The one other driver I just wanted to mention was Alex Albon. He's still saying that he's aiming to race at Singapore. I may be Captain Hindsight and have a PhD in that, and I don't have a medical degree, but that seems like a lot. Coming back from major surgery and respiratory kind of failure from everything we've seen, to then race at Singapore. He's only out of hospital last week, Tuesday.
Did he have appendicitis? Was that what it was? Yeah.
So he had appendicitis, and then went and had surgery to sort that out, and then following surgery had a complication which put him on a ventilator and in ICU, which eventually, they got him all better, and he released a statement or a little video during the week to say, my plan is, as with a big smile on his face. Actually, it's very sweet, but it just seems like a lot to try, and especially in Singapore, like we've seen what some of the others are doing to prepare. They're putting exercise bikes in saunas and whatnot to try and acclimatise. Like that's going to be putting a huge amount of stress on your body, right?
Yeah,
that's my official medical opinion.
Official medical. Yeah. If he thinks he can do it, let him do it. He's got the contract to drive. He's the driver. I mean, we got AFL finals coming up. Would you let Joel Selwood play at 80% rather than 100? You probably would. I got tickets, by the way, which is bloody awesome. So,
do you?
Yeah.
I mean, the D's aren't in it, so I don't really care. But it is what it is. It'll be all right.
I had a friend ring me up and he goes, "Oh, yeah, you're coming. I've got 2 tickets." I was like, "Yes." Anyway, so moving on, Freya. We're an F1
do you know what?
podcast.
We are an F1 podcast, but just very briefly, and this is semi F1. It must have been like only a couple of weeks ago, actually. I probably had one of the greatest weekends of my life, which was Daniel Ricciardo Monza, and the D's had just made it through. And as a long-suffering D's and then also DR fan, it was just I didn't know what to do with myself, in all honesty. I was like wandering around in 40-degree heats with a Daniel Ricciardo hoodie on and my D's beanie, and I was like, who is this lunatic? Anyway, so quite a different year this year. If you, like me, somebody who lives overseas but also just wants to watch shows from all over the place and missing out on your favourite shows not available in your region, try to keep your private time private. Campy, looking at you. Well, let me introduce NordVPN. NordVPN allows Campy to watch The Real Housewives of Alabama whenever he wants. But if you're bored with Australian Netflix, easy to do, why not take it for a spin in the US? Using NordVPN and a click of a button, you can do just that. You don't need to travel to Japan or Singapore, which is where our next Grid GP is, for your favourite anime when recording. NordVPN brings it right to you. You can reach 5,000 server options and no show is out of your reach. So using our link, nordvpn.com/Lakeside Drive, you can receive a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 4 free months. That's 4 free months, Campy, of straight Real Housewives. You can cover OC, Alabama, New York, Florida. I reckon there's maybe a Denver Real Housewives. I don't know. But these are all accessible to you using NordVPN. Plus, part of our binging, we want to keep it private, right? So NordVPN keeps your information encrypted so you never have to worry about your IP or location getting out. And they've also doubled down on keeping you safe with their new threat protection feature. So say goodbye to intrusive website ads and malware, of course. Even if you download an infected file, threat protection kicks in and it deletes it, just like Campy probably wishes he could delete his browsing history. But it makes a mess of your computer, as he will know. But NordVPN is there with its threat protection feature. And all of this is risk-free. Don't forget that there is literally no risk to you with their 30-day money-back guarantee. So give it a try, and if you like it, that's awesome. If you don't, they'll issue a refund and you can pretend the entire situation never even happened. Check out the link in our, where is it? Check out the link up the top, nordvpn.com/Lakeside Drive to get your subscription started today. Formula One, let's move on. So let's get into our profile for this week. Now, just watch me butcher this name, but the woman I want to talk about here is Christina Emanuelides, who is a CFD engineer at Alfa Romeo. And yes, I did have to look up what a CFD engineer is, and and that was the first question you asked me.
I know what it is. I know what it is, Freya.
You do now.
It's a computational fluid dynamics person.
person is the best part of that title.
Yeah.
That is right. That's right. So he's a computational fluid dynamics engineer, but as we've both learned, has nothing to do with fluid, not in the way that we think it's going to. But we'll get to that in a minute. So she joined Alfa Romeo in 2018. She's around about 30 years old. And we'll get to some of the other work that she's doing kind of off the track when it comes to Racing Pride and FIA Girls on Track. But just a bit about her background before we get into exactly what a CFD engineer does. So Christina went to McRob in Melbourne. And for anybody who's driven around Melbourne or has been to the Melbourne Grand Prix, that school is about as close as you can get. It's basically inside the track. So she was kind of saying, we used to get Thursdays and Fridays off because of the fencing that would go in for the Melbourne Grand Prix. So she did grow up around it a little bit, but at the same time she said, my family wasn't obsessed with Formula One. We weren't a motorsport family, but I knew what it was. And she kind of said, look, I was pretty passionate about cars and technology. I just liked to know how things worked, which of course means that engineering was very much the perfect combination when it comes to both what she's interested in and what she was good at. So she was saying that they often used to get things like career profile tests and whatnot done at school, and she said it always came out every single time as engineering. And she said luckily her interests did align with her personality and her strengths. And unlike some of the other people who we have talked about who kind of said, Formula One became a bit of a goal once I really learned that was kind of the pinnacle of engineering. For her, Formula One was, in fact, always the goal. She started researching how to get into it at the end of school. But as you can imagine, people who are finishing school kind of, 12, 13 years ago, now we just jump online and you can look at different people doing different jobs. Yeah. What was their, what did they do? It wasn't as easy then.
Yeah, you had to go and actually do some hardcore research about, how do you even plot a path when there's not a lot of, we don't know the companies that work behind the scenes in F1 and how you get there. And, the big names, but I know what Holden is, but I wouldn't have a clue where it is or what it is they do. But then you get online and they've got 25 different addresses. It's like, which one do I look at? Where do I go here? That was just the world back then, right? So good on her.
Yep.
That's
exactly
I like that because I kind of feel like those school things can pigeonhole kids a bit growing up. Mm-hmm. What does your personality suggest you'd be good at? I'm not, but I like that. That's a good feel-good story about, archaic. You would know about this archaic personality profiles.
Well, let's not go there because that is what I worked in for about 5 years and am exceptionally well qualified in. But I can also tell you that there are some terrible ones, which are. No, there are some terrible ones, but there are some very good ones, which have very good retest reliability. But we won't get into that because we're talking about Christina. Like you said, it was good that it worked for her. But she did have to work hard to find out that information. Like you said, you couldn't just look it up then. And it was really difficult for her to figure out what she needed to do, where she needed to go. Eventually started at RMIT in Melbourne, but again, as she continued to kind of do that research, she realised that really she had to move to the UK or somewhere in Europe, in order to kind of get a bit closer to that F1 goal. And like she said, you learn a lot in that researching process, things like the fact that teams have different connections with different universities because of where their factories are located. And there are degrees that you can really shape around motorsport. And she said, I just had no idea that was the case. That's not something that you really learn about in Australia, let alone at an all-girls school. And again, just through that process, kind of saying that finding out all that information was really, really hard, but it was a really important move for her. And you can imagine it would be pretty daunting. She was only 18 when she moved over to the UK, but she just said, look, I was following my dream. So I wasn't really, I wasn't really scared or didn't have a lot of fear. I was and very much confident in what I was trying to pursue. And she does credit her high school for that, in that she describes it as a very empowering place and just one that was where she was surrounded by smart, driven women, and everyone would just kind of say, yeah, like, I'm doing this, you know. So that very much a part of her drive. So Christina gets to the UK, does her Bachelor of Engineering at Oxford Brookes University. Like I said, only 18 when she moved, and lots of hurdles that she kind of describes when she gets there, including halfway through her second year realising that she was actually enrolled in the wrong course, which just amazed me for someone who I imagine is pretty like detail-oriented. How does that happen? But I'm sure there's a story.
Oh, wow. Wow. It's like putting a PowerPoint on the wrong wall, bro.
It's just like that, Campy.
Yeah.
But the tenacity that she has, which I'm sure you had, which helped you find the correct wall, and problem solving her way through that, really helped her to work through all of those challenges and settle into UK life. Now, she said that she was only one of 5 women in her engineering course of about 300 students, which she said, you know, it kind of reflects her current environment in a lot of ways. But went on from her Bachelor's of Engineering to then go and do her Master's by Research at Durham University. And you can actually go and watch the wind tunnel test on YouTube, which her thesis was on, which was motorsport tyre heat transfer and aerodynamics. Just a little bit of information for you there if anyone's interested. But so after her... Yeah, exactly. I was very tempted to read out just like a couple of lines from her thesis, which is just, it's another language, Campy. Like, anyway.
Yeah, it's like reading music.
It's pretty incredible.
A different.
It is. Yeah.
Yep.
It's very true. So she finishes her master's. She did work for several businesses, including a software business who supplies to F1. Like you said, there's all of these companies behind the sport, which she had to go and learn about. But in addition to the software businesses, automotive and then motorsport in the UK, Italy, and ultimately Switzerland. So you can imagine that on top of all of this, you know, she's got that pressure of living away as well, kind of away from family at a pretty young age. Common story in Formula One. In
saying that, you go overseas and everyone that's travelling is either Aussie or Kiwi, and they seem to be backpacking around the world. And it's fairly everyone you meet, just another bloody Aussie. So I left the place to get away from you, but no, not to minimise it. It is a big step at 19, being a girl. It's a bit different being a young guy, going and doing pub work and that sort of stuff, backracking around the world. But hey, that is excellent to show up.
Backracking.
You know what I'm trying to say. My use of the English language.
I do.
It is another language too, so it's excellent.
Indeed. No, like you said, it does that element of kind of being a female away is very different, and we'll get to part of that in a minute. But let's answer that question of what is a CFD engineer. So as we mentioned earlier, it is a computational fluid dynamics engineer. Which basically sees her working within the aerodynamics department. Creating and optimizing the aerodynamic simulations so that the aerodynamicists can then develop the car quickly and in a cost-effective way. So, yes, there is the wind tunnel that they can go and test parts in, but as we've talked about, that's expensive and to develop and manufacture the parts to then put in the wind tunnel. So simulation is really important.
Way before that, is that right?
Yeah, but also after, right? So that's exactly it. So if you, not sure if anyone listened to our last podcast with Dr. Catherine Richards, who is that wind tunnel test technician, Christina's role would come way before a potential upgrade gets into the wind tunnel, but for testing, but then also after. She's kind of on both sides when it comes to, the simulations and making sure that it's coming out of the wind tunnel as they expected, but then also going into it, having run simulations and that working effectively. But to put it in her words, because I'm probably describing this terribly, she says, we use data from the track and the wind tunnel, and we do a lot of checks and improvements to increase the quality of simulations. So it's all about the quality of the simulations and making sure that those are, in fact, testing parts in a way that is expected to, and that's happening reliably. So while that's the nature of her role at Alfa Romeo, she does also note that, depending on the size of the team, that could look quite different. So a CFD engineer at different teams could actually be doing quite different things. Some might be more focused on the software programming side of things, correlation to wind tunnel work. Others might be more kind of collaborative on the aero problem-solving side of things. So the size of the team, if you work for a really big team, it could mean that you're much more specialised in those areas. But she says she's very happy at Alfa Romeo, but the size of the team is an interesting one, and is hoping that it grows. So she did an interview with the female drive and they did ask if she was looking to work for one of those bigger teams, and she kind of said, look, prior to Alfa, she was working for businesses that supplied teams in software in particular, and through that was allowed to do the kind of on-the-ground support work, which meant that she got actually to experience those different team dynamics, almost from an outsider's perspective though. And she said, as a result of that, I can confirm that I'm really happy actually in Alfa Romeo, is loving living in Switzerland, but she does hope that the team will grow, which again, through some of the other comments that we've heard from Valtteri and other employees as well at Alfa Romeo, there's the kind of that desperate want for that group to grow and evolve.
And come together a bit more. And Now, Valtteri's been very open about that, and rightly so. Coming from Mercedes, the pinnacle of F1 at the time, he would have got a rough idea of and a very good understanding of what more people can bring to more people's the wrong thing, but a collaborative and a collective and a diverse group of people can actually bring to a race team like that. And he sees that moving forward, and he's obviously behind closed doors. It's like, right, we need to forge the relationships with people now inside the working team so that when new people come in, that's what's modelled, and they just get on straight board. It's the culture thing, right? And grow those teams into what they can be to get best race cars on the grid. Obviously, there's budget, there's constraints that they need to work around, and all the other stuff that comes with it. But Valtteri would have a very good understanding of what that entails.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to hear about that from people who have different perspectives within the sport, right? From engineers, from drivers, people working in the factory, people who are at the track, all kind of echoing that sentiment. But interestingly as well, she kind of said, look, being based in Switzerland or whether you're based in Italy, depending on where your factory is, changes how likely you are to kind of move around. There's a difference in a UK team where there's more mobility. There's a difference between moving from Woking to Milton Keynes in comparison to, Switzerland to Italy. So, with that in mind as well, she's kind of said that she's very keen to stay put for the time being. But in terms of what a day in the life of a CFD engineer looks like, Christina says, look, there's no standard day. It really depends on what stage of the season you're at and what's going on. So you can expect throughout the season roughly to know approximately what you'll be working on. You tend to work on different parts at different times of the season. But with that said, she said, one perhaps constant part of her role is meeting regularly with the aerodynamicists to understand what their needs are and what needs to be tested. There's something at the track that didn't perform as they had expected it to, that needs to go back in the simulator, understand what was different there, but it's all about problem solving. It's just that the problem is constantly changing. And that's interesting to me. I kind of think, it's easy to imagine a role like that it would be quite predictable, but that's actually something that she said it's more unpredictable than even she would have expected. But that's something that really appeals to her in terms of the variability of it all, and it keeps every day interesting. Another kind of element of her role is that in comparison to some other positions involved in Formula One, there's no off-season. It's kind of the same the whole year round.
Just
So
rolls
naturally
in.
it's heightened. It's just season into season. So kind of naturally it's heightened. Like they're busy just before the start of a season when they're kind of running those final simulations to actually develop a part, put it on track. But I can imagine that, and it doesn't sound dissimilar from lots of roles in Formula One, that's something you have to be really careful with, burnout. When you think about that kind of relentless application, that's something that you would think that there is a susceptibility to. And actually being passionate about it can increase your vulnerability to it. Question for me is how much Formula One and then the teams think about, the the sustainability of how things are organised. And she does talk about that quite a bit actually, in terms of saying, how much does Formula One really think about the people? Not much.
Yeah, I think if you work for a Formula One team, like they're past work-life balance, right? It's like there's work and then there's travel and then there's work and then there's, if you choose to have a family at home, they need to be very respectful of and understand what it is you're passionate about and what you do. So there is no balance, but the burnout thing is interesting. I know a couple of guys, even just locally here, that have businesses that operate and work in and around V8 supercars. I know one particular guy who was a race engineer for many, many years, and he got incredibly sick at one point, and it wasn't life-threatening or anything, but it just meant that it was all a stress thing. It was all just the stress of the job, after, not that he physically showed stress, but, the stress of that job after many years just put him in a place where he just burnt out and just needed 3 months in bed, really. And, I know another couple of guys who are mechanics and they're volunteers, and it takes up a hell of a lot of time just to go and do these things. They're very hard-working individuals as it is, but, throw in family, kids, dynamics, travelling around the world, I can only imagine that balance just gets thrown out. You must be, you're almost like a driver or an athlete, you're incredibly selfish to do what you want to do and driven to get the results you get. I think it's quite rewarding as well, but, we're past that work-life balance when it comes to working in F1, aren't we? It's sort of expected. It's like if you go work for one of the top.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, and I think it's an interesting to see how it affects the different roles, though. Like I said, we do think about it a lot when it comes to the drivers because of obviously what their bodies are going through in combination with that travel. Now, her role is actually mostly factory-based in comparison to other engineering roles which might be providing that on-the-ground support because she is based with the simulator. So she's mostly factory-based, almost completely factory-based. But another interesting thing here is that she's kind of saying we think about Formula One as this, playground for innovation. But what's interesting when she said she's come from, software businesses and automotive businesses, for example, because you have regulations and limitations within Formula One, people don't always understand how much they affect how that affects how you use resources and what you can and can't do. So it almost limits the logic or the accuracy or the efficiency that you might otherwise want to go about things with. Said, coming from automotive, they used to be able to run sims for days, whereas, you don't have the time or the resources or allowance to kind of test that extensively. But of course that means, she said, we then have a new conundrum, which is really important, which is the balance between speed and accuracy. So again, just another interesting understanding as to how things like regulations, cost caps, technical considerations affect every single role that is involved with getting a car on track.
Yep.
So the last bit which I just wanted to touch on when it comes to Christina and the other work that she is doing, obviously in addition to being a CFD engineer, we now know what that is
being
her
a
work
woman in
when it comes
motorsport.
to being a woman in motorsport, and that is exactly it. So before we get to her current work as an ambassador, in so many ways, her reflections on her university experience are super interesting. So, as I mentioned, she was about one in five of 300, and she said it was pretty rare to have other women in her class. But she said, I always felt like I belonged. You know, I worked hard to get there. And she said, I wasn't trying to be one of the boys. I was just being me. And to me, that is a really interesting statement, because we're talking about there the difference between kind of assimilation and belonging, where, you know, that idea of fitting in is saying, who do I need to be in order to be accepted? Whereas saying I feel like I belong somewhere is saying, exactly, you know, I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking, in fact, for you to be exactly who you are. But I will leave my organisational culture talk for another time. But just another insight from someone who is a minority in this sport. So Christina, interestingly, said that it kind of took her a few years to establish her stance on things. So she said, you know, I didn't kind of come into Formula One and then immediately join certain messages or kind of campaigns. She said, I wanted to gain my own experience in this stuff first to actually understand what my stance on things was, and then kind of position her voice through her lived experience. But then after a while, understood her position with these types of topics when it comes to things like gender equality, diversity and the like, and really recognised why it was actually important to her. So not just jumping on a message, but doing it through her own experience. But she said, once I was in, so to speak, and I could reflect on my own experience getting into Formula One, was able to say, okay, maybe the opportunities aren't equal for everyone. And of course, with this, we're talking about all sorts of diversity areas, you know, things like different socioeconomic groups and backgrounds, not just gender. But she talks about this quite a lot in terms of going back to that point at the start of saying there just isn't that much information out there of trying to get into the sport, especially if you're not born into it, so to speak. So that's a big motivating force for her in terms of trying to put her story out there, the course that she took, the conversations that she had, the moves that she made to get into a sport so that other people it can be easier for others.
And I think
just
a lot
to talk
of
about now,
a lot of that stuff too is it's like me, motorsport for me growing up. My parents weren't. My dad wears a suit, runs building companies, like he sits in an office, like he's not a very hands-on guy. But for me, like motorsport and motorbikes was what I was passionate about. So for mum and dad to get me a motorbike and try and get me into racing was so foreign from them. You know, they had to go and, you know, meet people, and, you know, dad's good like that. He met people, or he knew people that in his industry that were involved in it, and he made those connections and figured out how to make it work. But it's a bit like me jumping into a rowing, like an elite rowing college. If you're not in that culture or those things aren't at your disposal, it's not the want to get there. You know, it's a lot harder to get in because you start from the bottom and you know nothing, right? And I love the fact that these people come from these places where they're so out of it. They've got that, you know, that ruthless tenacity to just not only be themselves in this world, but chase the dream that they want because they know that's the dream they want. And it's an all credit to Christina, clearly. I mean, all credit. And I think that's probably been modelled to her right throughout school. She said that, I'm not sure what high school she go to.
McLaren.
Didn't say. Oh, McLaren. Yeah, right.
McLaren,
so, yeah. Again, another high-performing school as well, and having a wife that grew up in an environment like that as well. I know that very passionate about their school and, you know, what they can bring to the world, and that feminism of yesteryear, which really did empower a hell of a lot of women to go out and do what they do. I think it's amazing. We're now seeing that generationally throw through. So yeah, it's good for Christina. I'm somewhat admire her from afar.
For sure. Like you said, empowering is exactly the word that she uses, and now she gets to be a proponent of positive action. And as you said, it's having that intergenerational effect, but even within this generation, it's having that effect. She said, she's talking to girls who are only a couple of years younger than her, or maybe they've finished their course and they're trying to figure out how to get their apprenticeship or their internship or their first job. And so she's like, we're doing in generation change, not necessarily, she's like, we need to move faster. But like I said, she is now very much a proponent of positive action. So she's an FIO Girls on Track ambassador. So like I said, she didn't know how to get into the sport, let alone have a female engineer mentor, and she wants to show others how to go about it. And, she's like, I can do this. I can provide them with mentorship. She also does community outreach work with the Female Drive. She's also on Women's Sport Collective as an advisory panel member, and also having joined Racing Pride as an industry ambassador in 2021. She was then appointed as on the board of directors in 2022. So very much hoping to drive change towards a more inclusive and equal landscape in that respect in the motorsport industry. But all of that brings with it a lot of work. And again, like you said, you kind of admire from afar because, yes, she's going about her engineering role, but she goes, there's a great kind of line from her in a couple of interviews that I've listened to. She said, I'll be ducking off to go to the bathroom and at a track or in, factory between simulation tests, and I'll be taking a call for, Racing Pride and this, that, and the other. And she said, it's actually non-stop work, but it's worth it when it comes to helping to drive change more quickly. And a lot of that required her to say, why is it important to me? And she said, well, when you have a diverse team, you make a faster car. And she said part of it is as simple as that, but also then providing information and resources, again, going back to that idea of how difficult it was for her to get into F1, but then that visibility factor, which we talk about a lot. But for this, she's actually not necessarily talking about visibility of being able to see other women working in motorsport, but all the different ways in which you can get into motorsport.
Of the change. Yeah, and
exactly.
Of the change they're making as well, yeah.
Yep, for sure. So she's really supportive of the more in-depth coverage that we're now getting, which is helping to grow the fan base and helping people to understand all of those different roles, which is also exactly what we're doing here, talking about people who are involved in different parts of motorsport, not just the drivers. She was asked, what advice would you give to a young Christina? And she said, I would always ask that question of whether or not it was achievable to get into F1. And so my advice would be, there are many paths. You might take a different path to 100 other people. Maybe you get there a different way, but whatever you don't do, don't give up. So on that note, Christina Emanuelides, you're an absolute
Star.
hero, star in our books. And do you know what's awesome about her when you listen to people's kind of tone and the way they talk about their role and everything else, she doesn't come across as someone who takes her role in F1 for granted in the slightest. And to me, that is probably because she had to work so hard to get there and took very deliberate steps to get there. She hasn't fallen into the sport. This is very much somebody who has worked her backside off to get there. So kudos, claps to Christina.
Yeah, absolutely. Send you a T-shirt.
Exactly. Christina, there is a T-shirt coming your way.
Excellent.
Alrighty. That is our profile for this week. Thank you for joining me, Campy. That's all I've got.
Anytime.
Is there anything else you wanted to chat about? We've done pretty well.
No, I think after that we can't do it. Quickly, what are your thoughts on Danny Rick and Mercedes taking a testing role, so to speak?
I just don't. I'm with Lewis Hamilton on this. Like, I just don't think it's a great move for him. The one thing I would say is that I have a worry that if he's out of the car completely, we are thinking very optimistically to think that someone's then going to bring him back into the sport. It's been done. Yes. Obviously, we know it's been done, but I think now with, you guys are talking about this kind of team's obsession with finding the next Max, the next Lewis Hamilton in a current batch of 19-year-olds, and that being the way it seems to be going, I worry that if he's out of a seat completely, that we don't see him get back in one. And, hey, if that means that he is at tracks and then somebody else is sick and then he jumps in that car and pantsers everybody, then maybe it's a good move for him if that's an available option.
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
Nick DeVries. Like, if he wasn't there as a reserve driver, he wouldn't be in contention for the seats that we're currently talking about him in the way that he is. So maybe it helps him keep an opportunity open.
Yeah, perfectly said. He needs to be in the car. He needs to be on the grid. I have a little feeling that it's a bit like a Jenson Button career move, that something will pop up, like the Braun thing. And that'll only happen.
Kind of the 2008, 2009 situation.
Yeah, all with Ross Braun. Well, Button, I said on Monday, Button was out of a career. He's out of a drive. And then, at midnight before the season started, he got this call to say, come and drive this car. It was a world championship car. But I have a feeling it's a bit like that. And that only happens if someone gets injured or Lewis Hamilton retires. And they go, all right, Danny, you're up, step up. I know. I'm too hopeful.
Yeah, he's kind of said that he's already said that that's not happening anytime soon. So, I think at the same time, I don't think that he's a reserve driver. I think he is a top 20 driver. No. He's a top 5 driver. But at the same time, if that's what helps you keep potential track time and be there when the opportunity arises, if that's what he wants to do is stay in the sport, then do it. But if that's not what you want, then I don't know. Go and produce more epic merch that I will waste all my money on.
It is.
I bought a bucket hat.
Unlike our merch at, I don't even know what our lakesidedrive.com. Is it even there?
Let's go with that. James is going to hate us.
Who cares?
Oh, dear.
No, it's quality.
And on that note, I think we might wrap up our podcast for this week. James, we don't hate you. We do care. Alrighty. Thanks for joining me, Campy, and making sure that this was not a phlegm-free podcast. And everybody, don't forget that you can... I'm glad you enjoyed it. Don't forget you can support the show by either subscribing to our YouTube channel, getting some merch from our website that we don't know the name of, and grabbing a NordVPN subscription, or jumping onto our Patreon link, which you find in our bio. And thank you to everybody who does that already. We appreciate it dearly. But it's over and out from Campy and Freya.